They say family's the place where sacrifice proves its worth, but what if that sacrifice was twisted into something unthinkable? A mother in her 50s, willing to give away a piece of her own body to save her son, suddenly finds her trust shattered by the very people who swore to protect him. Imagine lying on the cold table, the blinding lights above you, ready to lose a kidney, only to hear your 9-year-old grandson crash through the doors with a cracked phone in his hand, screaming that your son was never sick by chance. That kind of revelation doesn't just stop a surgery, it splits a family, exposes secrets, and forces everyone to ask, who can you trust when betrayal wears the mask of love? Would you still go through with it if the truth was ugly, or would you risk everything to uncover what was hidden? Tell me what you would choose. Leave your thoughts in the comments, and if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, please like, share, and subscribe. Your voice keeps this channel alive, and your support makes sure no story is buried in silence. The metal of the table pressed into my back, and the fluorescent light above pierced my eyes until I had to squint. I told myself this was the right thing, that Michael needed me, that a mother's duty was to give without hesitation. But my heart slammed inside my chest like a trapped bird. The anesthesiologist held the syringe steady, its contents glinting under the light while machines beeped with ruthless rhythm. Outside the glass window, I saw Vanessa, arms folded, her sharp eyes fixed on me. She didn't blink, didn't soften, just stared, as if her will alone could force the medicine into my veins. Beside her, her parents whispered, their silhouettes smug and certain. I tried to breathe, but the air felt heavy, as though my lungs were filling with cement. My fingers trembled against the thin sheet. Every memory of raising Michael, his first laugh, his scraped knees, his promise to build me a house when he grew up, flooded me at once. Now he was pale, fading in the room next door, trusting that my sacrifice would give him back his life. I clung to that thought, even as dread crawled up my spine. The doctor flipped through my chart, his pen tapping, the sound slicing the silence. A nurse laid out instruments with quick, metallic clicks. Somewhere in the corner, another nurse pulled the straps tighter across my arms. I felt less like a patient and more like a prisoner awaiting judgment. My lips whispered a prayer, though I wasn't sure if I wanted strength to go through with it or courage to stop it. Vanessa leaned closer to the glass, her mouth forming silent words. Do it. Now. Her eyes gleamed, not with fear of losing her husband, but with triumph, like a gambler certain the dice would land her way. My pulse quickened, sweat slid down my temples. Still, I closed my eyes, forcing myself to surrender, telling myself I had no other choice. Then it came, the sudden slam of the door. A rush of cold air swept through the sterile room. Instruments rattled on their trays. My eyes flew open as every head turned. The world seemed to hold its breath in that instant, just as the needle was about to pierce my skin. The door slammed against the wall, and for a moment, every sound in that sterile room froze. My breath caught in my throat as a small figure burst through the opening like a gust of wind. Ethan! His sneakers were caked in mud, his school shirt wrinkled and damp with sweat, his chest heaving as if he had run for miles. A nurse chased after him, her voice shrill, begging him to stop, but he pushed forward with a kind of desperation I had never seen in a child. The straps on my arms held me down as I tried to lift myself to meet him, my heart pounding louder than the beeping machines around me. He clutched an old phone with a shattered screen, his knuckles white from the grip. His eyes were wide, shining with both terror and something else, something fiercer, like a boy carrying the weight of an entire family. He ignored the hands trying to pull him back, ignored the cries of the nurse, and fixed his gaze on me. "Grandma, I have to tell them why Dad really needs your kidney." His voice cracked, but it cut sharper than any scalpel. The room went utterly silent. A clamp slipped from a doctor's hand and hit the floor with a metallic clang that echoed like a gunshot. I wanted to scream his name, to shield him, to demand an explanation, but my throat was dry and paralyzed.
Across the glass, Vanessa pounded her fists, her face twisted, shouting that he was just a child, that no one should listen. But her mask had slipped. I saw the panic in her trembling lips, the fear etched into her eyes. Her control was slipping with every word that fell from my grandson's mouth. He took a step closer, tears forming but refusing to fall. His tiny hands shook as he lifted the phone, holding it up as though it were the last piece of armor he had. I searched his face and saw the boy I had rocked to sleep, the boy who once believed monsters only lived under his bed. Now he was standing against a monster wearing his mother's smile. He looked at me with an intensity that pierced straight through my chest. The air grew heavier, the machines louder, as if the entire room braced for what would come next. My body strained against the straps, but I couldn't move. All I could do was watch as Ethan drew in a deep breath, his voice trembling but unbroken, ready to set fire to the lies that surrounded us.
The sight of Ethan standing there with that broken phone burned into my mind. But before his words spelled into the room, my memory dragged me backward, pulling me to the days before everything began to unravel. Our small house in Ohio had always carried the smell of soil and soap, a place built on sweat and sacrifice. I rose before dawn every morning, my hands cracked from years of hauling produce to the market. I stitched torn shirts under the yellow glow of a flickering lamp, long after the rest of the town was asleep. My husband, Robert, had been bound to a wheelchair for more than a decade, his silence a constant reminder of how heavy the world rested on my shoulders. His eyes followed me across the room, hollow but still clinging to something that used to be hope. Michael, my oldest, once filled that home with laughter. He was strong, tall, the kind of man who carried beams at construction sites as if they were nothing. He used to come home with dirt on his boots and a grin so wide it could light the room. But the strength slipped away piece by piece. At first it was fatigue, then weight loss, then nights where he confessed through gritted teeth that his urine was stained with blood. I clutched him, begging for answers, but he only smiled faintly, whispering that it was probably just the long hours wearing him down. Then came Vanessa, my daughter-in-law, moving through the door like a gust of perfume and practiced charm. She spoke gently, carried bowls of soup to Michael's bedside, lined up pills on the counter, reminding him with sweet insistence when to take them. Neighbors praised her devotion, calling me blessed to have such a woman caring for my son. I wanted to believe them, wanted to silence the unease that coiled in my chest whenever her eyes lingered too long, cold and calculating. One night, I woke to the faint murmur of her voice outside, just beyond the kitchen window. She was on the phone, whispering, words tumbling too quickly for me to catch. I pressed closer and heard enough to freeze my blood. "It's all according to plan. Don't worry." I pushed open the door and demanded to know who she was talking to at that hour. She jumped, then laughed, brushing it off as a call to a friend. She patted my arm and told me to go back to bed. I did, but my heart thudded against my ribs, every beat carving deeper lines of doubt. Daniel, my younger son, visited often, his shirt streaked with grease from his plumbing jobs, his hands rough, but always bringing me something small, a loaf of bread, a bag of oranges. He fixed the humming ceiling fan, replaced the flickering light bulb, all while watching me with eyes that knew I was carrying too much. "Don't burn yourself out, Mom," he said once, voice low. "You've already given more than anyone should." I brushed it off, telling him his brother needed me more, but his silence lingered like a warning. And then there was Ethan, my light in those heavy days. He came after school with his backpack sagging, sneakers muddy, plopping down in the yard with toy cars I had bought him at the flea market.
His laughter used to be pure, but one evening it faltered. Grandma, what if someone made Dad sick on purpose by giving him the wrong medicine? My spoon slipped from my hand, clattering against the stove. I asked him what he meant, but he only pushed his car back and forth, eyes wide and scared, lips pressed tight. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, listening to the tick of the clock, staring into the dark yard, feeling the walls of my own home close in. The whispers, the pills with no labels, the way Vanessa hovered like a guard instead of a wife. It all swirled together like storm clouds gathering above us. My hands shook as I folded the laundry, but in my chest a truth began to stir, sharp and undeniable, even if I wasn't ready to face it yet.
The kitchen smelled of onions sizzling in oil when Vanessa appeared in the doorway without a sound. She didn't greet me, didn't smile. She dropped a stack of papers on the counter, the edges smearing through the steam rising from my pot. "Only your kidney matches," she said, her voice cutting like glass. "You have to do this. Michael doesn't have time." Her eyes locked on mine, daring me to argue. My hand froze around the wooden spoon. It slipped, clattering against the skillet, spraying drops of oil across the stove. I whispered that I would do anything for my son, but the words stuck like ash in my throat. She gave the faintest smirk, as if the battle had already been won. Within minutes, the Harrises walked in as though the house belonged to them. Mr. Harris adjusted his tie, his chest puffed with false dignity, while his wife strode straight to the dining table and sat down. "A real mother sacrifices," she declared, her tone carrying the weight of judgment. "The neighbors will talk if you hesitate. Do you want them to say you don't love your son?" My knees weakened, the room shrinking around me. Michael, pale and trembling, leaned on the wall and reached for my hand. "Save me, Mom," he whispered. His grip was icy, and his eyes begged with the innocence of a boy who once ran barefoot across this very floor. I felt trapped, like a cornered animal. The walls seemed to pulse with their voices, the tick of the clock pounding like a hammer in my ears. Vanessa crossed her arms, her gaze never leaving me. Her silence was heavier than their words, pressing down until my shoulders slumped. I nodded, barely audible, and the room erupted in false gratitude. Mrs. Harris clapped her hands. "That's the spirit of a true mother," she announced. My chest burned, but I forced myself to smile at Michael, though my stomach churned with dread. That night, the house felt colder than ever. I carried a bowl of soup to Robert in his wheelchair. He stared blankly at the flickering television, his face sagging in quiet resignation. I wanted to ask if I was doing the right thing, but the words would not come. His spoon clinked against the bowl, his silence cutting deeper than any answer. Later, when I stepped into the hallway, I froze. From behind Michael's door, muffled voices leaked out. Vanessa's tone was low but sharp. "After the transplant, we'll have everything we need." She paused, then added, "She won't dare back out." My hand shook against the wall, my breath shallow. I thought of Ethan's question, the one he asked with such fear. What if someone made Dad sick on purpose? I retreated to the kitchen, scrubbing the same dish over and over until my fingers wrinkled. The water scalded, but I barely felt it. Upstairs, floorboards creaked, and I imagined Vanessa pacing, planning, sealing every path of escape. Daniel's face flashed in my mind, his warnings, his silence at dinner when her eyes cut through him. I wanted to run to him, to beg for guidance, but pride pinned me to the spot. When I finally crawled into bed, the sheets smelled of bleach and sweat. The house groaned with the weight of secrets, each shadow stretching longer than it should. I stared at the ceiling, my heart hammering, and I whispered into the dark, "I'll do it. I'll give my son what he needs." Yet deep inside, the words tasted of betrayal,
and I knew the sacrifice demanded of me was not born of love, but of something far more sinister.
The following afternoon, Daniel showed up at the hospital without warning. His boots tracked dirt across the polished floor, his shirt still streaked with grease, but his face was pale, tight with something he couldn't hold back. "Mom, come with me," he muttered, and before I could ask why, he pulled me down a long corridor toward the back parking lot. The air smelled of asphalt baking in the sun, and from behind a row of cars, Daniel pointed, "Look!" I followed his trembling finger. At the far end of the lot, Vanessa stood by her SUV, glancing over her shoulder as if she feared being seen. A man in a dark jacket and baseball cap approached. My heart clenched when she lifted a small white bag from the trunk. The man took it quickly, almost reverently, and in return pressed a thick envelope into her hand. She slipped it into her purse with a motion so smooth it seemed practiced. Daniel raised his phone and snapped pictures, the shutter click slicing through the heavy silence. My pulse hammered as I watched Vanessa laugh softly with the man, their heads close, their voices too low for me to catch. Then she turned, her face composed again, and walked briskly toward the hospital doors as though she had only been parking the car. Daniel's jaw was tight as he shoved the phone toward me. "Look at this, Mom. Tell me this is nothing." The screen showed the blurry frame of her hand clutching the bag, the envelope sliding between fingers. My stomach twisted. I wanted to deny it, to say it was some mistake, but the bile rising in my throat betrayed me. We hurried back inside, and every fluorescent light seemed harsher than the last. Daniel cornered me in a stairwell, his voice cracking. "They're using him, don't you see? He's not just sick, Mom. Something else is happening." I pressed the phone back into his palm, my hand trembling. "Stop, Daniel. Don't say it. If you're wrong, these words could destroy us." But he only shook his head, eyes burning. "If I'm right, they'll destroy Michael." That night, I sat in my kitchen staring at those images, the faint glow of Daniel's phone casting Vanessa's secret across my table. I could still see the envelope in her hand, the way she tucked it away with such ease, like it was routine. Outside, the cicadas droned endlessly, their song pressing against the windows. I tried to pray, but the words faltered. I thought of Michael lying in that sterile bed, veins filled with whatever she poured into him. I thought of Ethan's wide eyes, his voice asking if someone had made his father sick. The pieces began to edge closer, jagged fragments scraping into place. My hands shook as I folded them together, but the image of Vanessa in that parking lot refused to fade. Daniel returned later, slamming the screen door behind him. He dropped into a chair, breathing hard. "I followed her for weeks, Mom," he admitted. "Today was the first time I caught proof." He slid the phone toward me again, the pictures glowing in the dark. I pressed my palms to my face, fighting tears. The kitchen clock ticked louder than it ever had before, each second drilling into me. I wanted to believe Vanessa was saving my son, not selling him piece by piece. But as the night stretched on, I realized denial was a luxury I could no longer afford. The night after Daniel showed me those pictures, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the glow of the phone until my eyes ached. My chest was heavy, my thoughts tangled, and I could barely breathe. That was when the screen door creaked open and Ethan stepped in, clutching his backpack against his chest as if it held his heart inside. He walked slowly, his sneakers leaving little streaks of mud across the floor, and without a word he slid into the chair across from me. His small hands fumbled with the zipper, and then he pulled out an old phone with a cracked screen. His eyes were wet, but his voice was steady. "Grandma, you need to hear this." He pressed play before I could respond. At first there was static. Then the unmistakable voice of Vanessa whispered through the tiny speaker. "After the transplant, the results will be perfect. Don't worry, she won't dare refuse." The words stabbed into me like shards of ice. I felt the blood drain from my face, my fingers slipping against the edge of the table until the phone nearly dropped. Ethan grabbed it back with both hands, clutching it tight, as if the evidence itself was too fragile to risk losing. I covered my mouth, but a broken sob escaped. She said those words with no hesitation, no fear, as if my sacrifice had already been sealed like a business deal. I looked at Ethan. He was only 9, but his eyes were old in that moment, full of sorrow too heavy for a child. "I found it on Mom's old phone," he whispered. "I didn't want to believe it, but I thought you had to know." I reached across the table and pulled him into my arms. His shoulders shook as he finally let the tears fall, and mine followed without resistance. "You're so brave," I whispered into his hair. "Braver than all of us." He pressed his face into my chest, and I felt the weight of his truth bury itself into my heart. As I held him, fragments of memory collided inside my head. The unmarked bottles on the counter, the envelope in Vanessa's hand, Daniel's trembling voice, Ethan's innocent question about medicine. They were no longer pieces scattered apart. They were fitting together, forming an image I couldn't ignore, a picture painted in betrayal and greed. My stomach churned, bile rising as I realized that Michael, my son, wasn't simply sick. He was being fed something, weakened on purpose, turned into data for someone else's profit. The house was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator. I sat there with Ethan in my arms, staring at the dark window where our reflections looked back at us like strangers. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped him. How had I been so blind, so desperate to believe that love still lived inside Vanessa's eyes? When Ethan finally pulled away, he wiped his face with his sleeve and whispered, "Grandma, don't do it. Don't let them take you too." His voice cracked on the last word, but it cut deeper than anything Vanessa had ever said. I wanted to promise him I wouldn't, but my lips froze, trapped between love for my son and the terror of what had been revealed. That night, I didn't close my eyes. I sat in the dark with the recording echoing in my ears, her voice repeating again and again until it burrowed into my bones. "After the transplant, the results will be perfect." I felt the walls close in, the air grow thinner, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I wondered if giving my son my kidney meant handing him over to the very people destroying him.
The next evening, the house was fuller than it had been in years. The air hung heavy with the smell of mint tea and tension so thick it pressed against my chest. I had gathered everyone, hoping for clarity, but the room felt more like a courtroom than a family gathering. Vanessa sat with her parents at the dining table, their chairs pulled up like thrones, while Daniel stood leaning against the wall, arms folded, jaw clenched. Michael lay on the couch, weak and pale, trying to mask his pain with a faint smile that broke my heart. Ethan sat quietly in the corner, his backpack hugged tight to his chest, watching everything with eyes too knowing for a child. I poured tea into chipped mugs, my hands trembling so badly the liquid nearly spilled. I cleared my throat, but the words almost died before leaving my lips. "I've made my decision," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. "I will give Michael my kidney." The response was instant. Mrs. Harris clapped her hands together, her high voice ringing like glass breaking. "That's what a real mother does," she declared. Mr. Harris nodded with satisfaction, puffing out his chest as if he himself had triumphed. Vanessa covered her face, her shoulders shaking with what looked like sobs, but I noticed her fists curling tightly in her lap, nails biting into her palms. "Thank you," she whispered, but her voice trembled with something I couldn't name. Michael's lips moved, his voice thin as paper. "Mom, you've always saved me.
You're saving me again." He tried to smile, but the corners of his mouth quivered with exhaustion. My throat ached, but I forced myself to nod, stroking his hand as if that would calm the storm inside me. Then Daniel exploded. "No!" His hand slammed against the table, rattling the mugs, making the tea slosh. His voice shook with rage. "Don't you see what they're doing, Mom? You're walking straight into their trap." He turned toward Vanessa, his eyes blazing. "You're poisoning him. You've been poisoning him all along." The room froze. Vanessa leapt to her feet, her chair scraping against the floor with a harsh shriek. "How dare you accuse me?" she shouted, her voice shrill, her face flushed red. "I've done everything for Michael, everything." Her hands trembled as she pointed at Daniel, her words dripping with venom. Daniel stepped forward, his voice rising. "Then explain the unmarked bottles. Explain the late-night calls. Explain the envelope in that parking lot." He slammed his phone on the table, the pictures glowing on the cracked screen. Vanessa's face paled, but she quickly composed herself, shaking her head violently. "Lies. Those are lies." I looked between them, my stomach twisting into knots. My son stood on opposite sides of a battlefield, and I was trapped in the center. Michael groaned, trying to rise but collapsed back against the couch, sweat beading his forehead. Ethan flinched at the sound and pulled his backpack tighter, his small body trembling. Silence filled the room, broken only by the tick of the old clock. I felt the weight of every eye pressing down on me, demanding a judgment I didn't know how to give. I forced my hands together in my lap, trying to steady their shaking. "Tomorrow," I whispered, "the surgery will happen." Daniel's voice cracked with desperation. "Mom, please, don't let them win. Don't let them take you too." His words sliced through me, but before I could respond, Vanessa's mother leaned forward, her smile cold and sharp. "It's decided," she said firmly. "The honor of this family will not be questioned." I sat in the dim light, the mint tea cooling on the table, and felt myself crumble inside. Later that night, when the house finally emptied, I pulled out a piece of paper and began writing my will with hands that shook so violently the letters blurred. I left what little I had to Daniel and Ethan, sealing the note with a tear that fell onto the page. Outside, the rain pounded against the roof, and I knew the storm had only just begun.
Dawn came, wrapped in a heavy fog, the kind that blurred the streets and hushed the town. I lay on the stretcher inside the ambulance, the siren wailing above me, the vibrations rattling through my bones. In my hands, I clutched a small cloth bag with a change of clothes and the old handkerchief from my wedding day, as if those fragile things could shield me from what was to come. My body felt like stone, yet my mind screamed with every bump of the road. When the doors opened, the cold air hit my face. The orderlies pushed me down the sterile corridor, the wheels squealing on polished linoleum. The scent of antiseptic stung my nose, making it hard to breathe. Ahead, fluorescent lights flickered, harsh and merciless. Behind me, I heard the click of heels. Vanessa walked with measured steps, her face calm, but her eyes glinted with something sharp, something triumphant. "You'll be fine," she said softly, leaning close enough that only I could hear. "After this, everything will finally be perfect." Her parents were already waiting at the hospital entrance, dressed as if they were attending a gala instead of a surgery. Mr. Harris in his pressed suit shook hands with the doctors, laughing too loudly, while his wife offered sugary thanks that dripped with false warmth. I saw her hand slide something into the palm of a young doctor, an envelope, thick and unmarked. He hesitated, glanced around nervously, then tucked it into his coat. My stomach knotted. I wanted to shout, to demand answers, but the stretcher kept moving, carrying me deeper into the building, further away from escape. They stopped just long enough to let me see Michael. He lay on a gurney, pale as snow, his lips cracked, his chest rising with shallow breaths. His eyes found mine, and for a fleeting second they brightened. "Mom," he whispered, his voice broken, "you're saving me." His hand reached out, trembling, and I took it, my heart shattering. I forced myself to smile, though my insides twisted. "I'll do anything for you, my boy," I murmured, pressing his hand to my cheek. Then the nurse pulled me away, and his face blurred behind the glass doors. Daniel burst into the hallway just as they wheeled me toward the surgical wing. His shirt was drenched with sweat, his hair clinging to his forehead. "Mom, stop this," he begged, grabbing the side of the stretcher. His eyes were wild, desperate. "Something's wrong. You can't go through with it." His grip was so tight the stretcher jolted. I wanted to answer, wanted to say I knew, but my throat closed. The nurse pried his hand away, pushing him back as security stepped in. Daniel's voice cracked as he shouted after me, "Mom, please, don't let them take you." I couldn't turn around. If I looked into his eyes, I would break. The stretcher rolled forward, wheels squealing like cries echoing down the corridor. Vanessa walked beside me, her smile thin, and her hand resting lightly on the railing, as if to claim me as hers. At the last corner before the operating theater, I caught sight of her again. Mrs. Harris stood with that same dark-jacketed man I had seen in Daniel's photos. She pressed another envelope into his hand, whispering something that made him nod quickly before slipping away through a side door. My heart pounded against my ribs, sweat sliding down my neck. The doors swung open, and the blinding lights of the operating room swallowed me whole. I clenched my fists around the fabric of the blanket, fighting the rising tide of panic as the voices around me faded into a single, relentless thought. I was being delivered, not as a mother giving life, but as a pawn in their game.
The lights above me were blinding, their glare burning into my eyes as the nurse lifted the syringe closer to my arm. My body tensed against the straps, every muscle screaming to break free. But I forced myself to stay still. I heard the steady rhythm of the monitor, each beep louder than the last, hammering like a countdown. Then the sound was shattered by the violent slam of the door. Cold air rushed in, rattling the trays of instruments. The doctors froze. My heart stopped. Ethan stormed into the room, his face flushed, his chest heaving. Mud streaked his shoes, his small frame trembling, but his voice carried like a shout from the heavens. "Stop! Everyone stop! Grandma, I have to tell them the truth." He held up the cracked phone with both hands, shaking but unyielding. A nurse lunged for him, but he twisted away, planting himself at my side. Across the glass, Vanessa's face twisted in horror. She pounded on the pane with both fists, screaming that he was lying, that he was only a child. But her voice cracked, betraying the fear that had begun to consume her. Her parents pressed against the window too, their mouths moving, urging the doctors to ignore him. Dr. Avery, the head surgeon, raised his hand sharply. Silence. His voice sliced through the chaos. "Let the boy speak." Everyone froze, eyes snapping to Ethan, who trembled under the weight of the moment. He clutched the phone so tight his knuckles turned white. His eyes found mine, wide and glistening, filled with pain no child should carry. "Grandma," he whispered, then louder, "Grandma, they've been hurting Dad. They're making him sick on purpose." The room gasped, my lungs seized, my heart thundered. Ethan's thumb pressed the screen and suddenly the room filled with a voice I knew too well. Vanessa's voice, cold and sharp. "After the transplant, the results will be perfect. She won't dare refuse." The evidence echoed off the sterile walls, undeniable. One of the nurses covered her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. A clamp slipped from another's hand, clanging against the floor. Dr. Avery's face hardened. "Stop the procedure," he ordered, his tone like steel. "Put that needle down." The anesthesiologist froze, lowering the syringe with trembling fingers. Vanessa shrieked from behind the glass. "Lies! It's fake! Don't listen!" She slammed her palm so hard the window shook. Ethan's small voice broke through her screams. "I have more," he said, and played a second clip. This time, the recording caught her mother's voice, low and cold.
With this transplant, we can sell the formula. The money will clean everything. The room turned to stone. Every breath held still. Vanessa panicked, shoving at the door, but security rushed in, forcing her back. She clawed at them, screaming my name, screaming Michael's name, but her eyes weren't filled with love. They were filled with terror of being exposed. Daniel burst into the room then, his chest heaving, his eyes blazing. He pulled Ethan close, shielding him, then glared at the doctors. "You see now. You all see. They were poisoning my brother." His voice cracked with fury, and for once, no one dared to challenge him. I lay there, tears streaming down my temples, into my hair, my body trembling not from fear, but from the weight of truth finally unveiled. My grandson had ripped the veil from their lies, and in that moment, the operating room became not a place of healing, but the stage where betrayal was dragged screaming into the light.
The screams outside the glass turned into chaos as security forced Vanessa and her parents down the hall. Her voice echoed, shrill and breaking, swearing that it was all lies, that she was saving her husband. But the more she shouted, the more the truth clung to the walls like smoke. Dr. Avery leaned close to me, his voice firm. "No transplant today. We're moving your son to another treatment plan." Relief and grief tangled in my chest. The straps were loosened, the cold table released me, and for the first time I could breathe. Daniel rushed to my side, pulling me into his arms. His hand smelled of grease and sweat, but the warmth of his grip steadied me. "You still have me, Mom," he whispered fiercely, his voice cracking. "I won't let anyone hurt you again." Ethan clung to my sleeve, his small body trembling, his eyes shining with both fear and triumph. I stroked his hair, whispering, "You saved me. You saved us all." The boy buried his face against me, and I felt his tears seep through the thin fabric of my gown. Later that night, Michael lay in a recovery room, tubes still running into his veins, his face pale but calmer. He turned his head when I entered, his eyes heavy with confusion. "Mom, tell me it isn't true," he rasped. "Tell me she didn't—" His words trailed off, broken. I sat on the edge of his bed and took his hand, trembling but warm. "My son," I whispered, "sometimes the ones closest to us wear the cruelest masks." His tears slid silently down his cheeks as he clutched my fingers like a drowning man. I bent low, kissing his forehead, and promised, "I won't let anyone harm you again." News traveled fast. By morning, the headlines were everywhere. Hospital scandal, illegal drug trials exposed. Faces of Vanessa and her parents stared back from the television screens in the waiting room, their smiles replaced with mugshots. Doctors whispered in the halls, nurses avoided my eyes, but I walked through with my head high. Not because I was unbroken, but because the truth had been dragged into daylight. Days passed, and Michael began dialysis treatments. He was weak, but there was life in his voice again, a fragile ember refusing to die out. Daniel stayed close, his protective presence filling the spaces where betrayal had hollowed me. Ethan's laughter slowly returned, though softer, touched with shadows no child should carry. I held him often, rocking him as I once did when he was a baby, whispering that courage had many forms, and his was the bravest of all. At night, I sat by Robert's chair. He hadn't spoken in years, but as I told him everything, the recordings, the confrontation, the arrest, I saw tears spill down his weathered face. His hand trembled, then tightened around mine, the faintest grip, but it said more than words ever could. I wept, not from despair, but from the strange comfort of knowing that even in silence he had heard me. When the house grew quiet again, I opened my old journal. The words flowed heavy but certain. Blood does not always define family. Truth does. Love does. Courage does. I wrote that betrayal can shatter a home,
but it can also strip away the lies and leave behind what is real. I closed the book and looked out the window at the pale moonlight spreading across the yard. The storm had passed, but its scars remained etched on our lives. Still, I knew one thing with certainty: I would never again let fear silence me. And to whoever hears my voice now, I ask you this: if you were faced with the choice I had, would you close your eyes and surrender, or would you fight for the truth even when it tears your heart apart? Leave your answer in the comments. And if you believe stories like mine must be told, like this video, share it, and subscribe. Your voice is the light that keeps truth alive.